Hello, and welcome to the Reimagine Jobs Spotlight on Regenerative Agriculture. I'm your moderator, Sarah Nicholas, with PASA Sustainable Agriculture, a policy specialist. Delighted to join you this evening. We have a great program. I also worked with Patricia DeMarco and Stephen Herzenberg to co-author the Reimagine Appalachia white paper on regenerative agriculture and reviving the Civilian Conservation Corps. We're excited to be joined tonight by several esteemed panelists who are working on regenerative agriculture initiatives in our region. Tonight's program is part of the Reimagine Jobs Showcase, which is a website, www.reimaginejobs.org, that was launched in September of 2020. The goal of this website is to highlight sustainable economic development initiatives and job opportunities in Southwest Pennsylvania. The website features local businesses and organizations in 9 sectors of sustainable economic development. Tonight's program on regenerative agriculture is the third in a series of programs that we're launching, diving deeper into each of the 9 sectors. We encourage you to take a look at the website and to explore the exhibitors and opportunities listed. Also, just a reminder that tonight's program is being recorded. Tonight's program will feature presentations by Darlene Livingston of Pennsylvania Farm Link, Laura Kodori and Dan Little of Worm Return and Involve Mint, and Brack Webb of Fifth Season. These presentations will highlight current initiatives that are employing people in our community and ways in which agricultural careers can continue to grow. We will then have an opportunity for general Q&A. We ask that you put your questions for all of the panelists into the chat button. If you have more specific questions for a single panelist, we will have breakout rooms after the Q&A where you'll be able to develop and dive deeper into the work of each panelist. You'll be able to choose the breakout room that most interests you, and in that breakout, you'll be able to network and have more specific, informal conversations about that topic. Thanks again for being with us tonight. Before we move to the panelists, I wanted to give you a very short framing of regenerative agriculture. I'm sure if you're on this program, you're very interested in the topic, but it's worth coming up with a rough definition because it has meant different things to people over the years. Regenerative agriculture is not really a new concept. It's been around forever. It's been practiced by Native Americans, many other cultures, people of color. The fact that it is coming back, I think, is a recognition that we need to do more to replenish our soils, which are the fundament of any agriculture. A couple of examples, cover crops, which are sowing crops, not necessarily for production, but that can be used in pastured situations. The idea is to keep the soil covered, not bare, so it can't erode, and so it can do a better job of capturing and sequestering carbon. Another common practice is no-till or conservation tillage, which is avoiding turning over the soil as it has been done for decades now, which accelerates soil loss and actually sends carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. No-till can also do a good job sequestering carbon. A third practice is pasturing livestock, rotational grazing, as opposed to a confined animal operation. That certainly is showing very strong attributes for carbon sequestration and many, many other co-benefits. And of course, soil amendments, whether it's compost or char or any number of things. 2 of our panelists will be talking about that tonight. I was also asked to give a very brief overview of jobs. 100 years ago, many Pennsylvanians, probably about 50% of us, were actually farmers. By the turn of the century, that started to change, and today, less than 2% of people living in Pennsylvania farm for a living. Many are actually farming with off-site jobs as well. So it has gone through an extensive period of consolidation. Today, there are 52,000 farms in Pennsylvania still operating, mostly family farms. The total employment in this sector in terms of direct agricultural jobs is 280,000. There is another similar amount of those jobs that are indirectly supported by agriculture, so a total of about 580,000. And again, less and less people are working the land. There are some bright spots, though. There is a movement now that we see at PASA Sustainable Agriculture, which is a nonprofit that supports regenerative practices. There's a lot of interest from young people who want to get back to farming, who are interested in where their food comes from, who are thinking about food security, and also who generally support the idea of growing food locally and being transparent about how it's raised. So that's a positive. In terms of economic drivers in jobs related to agriculture, there are a couple of important things to mention very quickly. One is our farmer population is aging. The average age of a farmer in Pennsylvania is now 57. So we are seeing some of those farms age out of production. There is also consolidation at work. There are fewer farms. We lost 10,000 farms over the last 20 years, which is a pretty big number. And finally, there is the issue of agricultural labor. 60,000 farm laborers in Pennsylvania come from overseas, either through H-2A visas or are undocumented, which has only been made a little more fragile and a little more uncertain by this past year's pandemic. So lots of issues to consider. Now, to kick it off, I would like to introduce Darlene Livingston, who will talk to us about farm succession and her work at Pennsylvania FarmLink.
Just a little bit about myself. I'm Darlene Livingston, and I do live in Indiana County, fourth generation farmer on our family farm, and our children who are a part of the farm as well are the fifth generation. Moved back here after 27 years in York County in the farming world down there. So anyhow, when we moved back, I felt like there was a reason for it. Not only were we the next generation to take over our family farm, but I figured there was a bigger reason that we were brought back to Western PA. So things like this are just, I want to say how I'm trying to give back also to this area, because I realize there's a lot of potential in Western PA, and I think there's unrealized potential here that we haven't even tapped yet. So just in relation to that, I do work for Pennsylvania FarmLink. I've worked there for 12 years as the executive director. It is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to link farmers to the future, and we do that in various aspects. And one of those is through succession planning and working with farmers to accomplish that. First of all, what is succession planning? It is a process that ensures the continuation of a business through the generations. I've always said that the sustainability of agriculture begins with farm succession. My reason for saying that is we need farms for the next generation. We need farms for beginning farmers. And through this process, it helps to ensure that farms stay in farming. And an effective succession plan is not written overnight and requires time and patience, communication, and compromise to accomplish. What's different from with a succession plan versus an estate plan? That would be that an estate plan divides assets after a person passes. A good farm succession plan transfers assets while the person is still alive, and that allows the business to be transferred while it's still a viable, hopefully growing business, which of course is advantageous for that next generation or the new farmers that will come on board. 3 items to consider in a a succession plan, or essentially how we like to look at it, is where is the farm now? Where do you want it to be? And how do you get there? The history of the farm, history of the family, who is doing what, how is the decisions being made? Are they operational decisions, strategic planning decisions, that sort of thing? How are the assets owned? How is the income distributed? There's a lot to look at. How are the expenses distributed between generations, financial informations, production data? Where do you want it to be? What are your values, your vision, mission, goals for the farm? Who are the stakeholders who needs to be involved out of the entire family? There's probably some that are interested in the farm and some who are working elsewhere and do not plan to come back. Explore the options you have available within the family and also beyond the family if you don't have a next gen. Where do you get there? How do you get there in your succession planning? It takes strategies, an action plan, who, what, how much money will be involved when, look at the financials, that sort of thing. And so just to kind of go into some basic overlay of the whole setup for farm succession and points that I feel is important is you can't start a succession planning setup too early, but you can start too late. The earlier, the better. You need to be talking to, your next gen from the family or others outside the family as early as possible. We started the conversation with our kids when they were teenagers, when we actually made the decision to come back to the farm. Transition the farm while it's still a viable business. Now, this is something that I say we did wrong, but we accomplished it. My father was 80, and it was a good example of how to wait too long to transition a business. We knew we had to restart the business when we came back to it. Hold farm meetings and include those potential next generation family members, or if you don't have family members, maybe you want to include employees that you see a good future with or something like that, but include those who may be a good fit for be the next generation on the farm if possible. Communication is always a challenge. It has to make financial sense. Can the next generation afford what's being offered or suggested? That is a very important point, and that can make the difference between a successful transition and an unsuccessful one, because many times the cost may be too high for that beginning farmer. Fair versus equal. If there is family members who have been working on the farm, and there's ones who are off the farm, those ones on the farm have put in sweat equity. They have probably put in years of work there on the farm that has allowed the farm to be what it is today. And usually that needs to be calculated in a succession situation for the farmer who will take on the farm to be able to afford it. So it's not necessarily equal between all siblings, but it's fair versus equal. You have to decide what you're going to do. Change is required. We can't be farming the way we did 50 years ago. So there's going to be new enterprises, potentially new ways of doing things. We need to embrace those as we transfer through the generations. Compromise is mandatory. I don't think I've seen any farm succession situation where there hasn't had to be compromise. Everybody comes to the table with their own ideas, the various generations, and we each have to listen to the other and compromise on the final plans of what we're going to do and what enterprises are going to be on the farm. Hire an attorney with agriculture experience. It is a must have someone who understands agriculture. We've seen that ourselves. We had an attorney who didn't understand the agriculture easement that was on our property, and we needed to find a different attorney. Get it in writing, whatever you choose to set up as a family for your farm. Get it in writing, and so your plans are carried out. And it also helps to hold you accountable too. So as I said, to me, farm succession is all a part of its farm and family sustainability. Our farm is now a centennial farm. So essentially it has been in the family for 100 years, and we take that seriously. And again, when we first started talking about coming back here, when my father made the offer that we could take over the farm, we asked our next gen if they were ready and if they wanted to take over the farm, because I was 50, and I knew that we were starting too late. If we did it, we needed to do it for our next generation. And that's what we did it for, because they said they would like to take on the farm later. And so we felt, I call us the bridge generation, because to me, we were bridging the gap between my father and our children. So between grandpa and grandchildren, we came back and restarted the business so that they have something to transition back to when they're ready. And if you don't have family, you don't have or don't have a farm that you're looking for, another thing that the PA Farm Link is involved in is we do have a database of potential farm opportunities with farmlands, and we also have one for entering farmers. So just a little screenshot of that. These are entering farmers, potentially someone who may be looking for an opportunity that if you have farmland, you may be able to find someone there, and vice versa. We are currently, it is free to enter our database through April 1st of this year, if anybody is interested in that. Another thing I'd just like to share with you, in case anybody's looking for those resources, is we do offer some succession planning tools that we are happy to share with anyone who would like to have those. We have a checklist regarding succession planning, a Planning the Future, Your Farm workbook. That also may be helpful to beginning farmers as well, who are looking for to start a farm, because it has some various budgeting and things like that in there, various budgets to work through, and what to look for in farmland and what your agriculture assets may be. We also have leasing booklets that talks about how to write a lease and what should be included. And we are farm meeting facilitators. I'm certified through the International Farm Transition Network, as are my coworkers, to facilitate farm family conversations. And we also refer people to the correct professionals and to other organizations. If we don't have the tools that we know they need, we seek to get them connected to the right tools so that they may continue in the future. But one thing you need to keep in mind is that, I think any farmer who owns a farm really wants to see that farm continue into the future. They want to see future generations on the farm. They've worked hard on the farm, and they probably, in most cases, done the best that they could do to care for that farm, to have proper practices on it. But there's always, room for improvement, and there's always room for the future. So even if they don't have a next generation themselves, I think everyone is looking to see that farm continue. So they most likely would encourage and desire to have a conversation with somebody about that opportunity. And this is the way we get the opportunities for beginning farmers, and to ensure that this continuation happens, because we don't want to see that land go out of agriculture. Because one thing we found is, if a farm is transferred via the will and it's equally divided between all family members, so we call it a pie, it's equally divided, that farm is less likely to stay in farming, because it may have to be sold to settle the estate. There may be a couple family members want to keep it, a couple want to give it up. So, of course, when it goes on the market, there's a high likelihood that it will be sold potentially outside of agriculture if it's somewhere where it's advantageous for a business or residential homes and things like that. So it is very important that we accomplish these tasks before one passes in order to see these farms stay in agriculture. But that's really kind of synopsis of my conversation on succession planning. I do see it as very integral as far as job opportunities in agriculture. And it is the future for our next generations and for beginning farmers. It's really important to the future of agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darlene. Our next speakers are Laura Kodori and Dan Little of Worm Return and Involvement, talking about composting and community financing.
So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you for having me here. My name is Laura Kodori. I own Worm Return. We've been keeping food scraps and other organic materials out of landfills for about 3 years now, and really trying hard to do that the last year when I lost my waitressing job on my lucky day last year. So it kind of made sense. And over the last 3 years, we've kept close to 130,000 pounds of food scraps out of the landfills, equating to about 6,000 pounds of methane from being released into the environment. What's really cool too, is I believe Sarah had maybe mentioned about it. The finished product of compost will actually sequester or pull out carbon dioxide from the environment. So it's like a win-win on both sides. You keep methane from going out and you take carbon dioxide out that's already there. So I love composting, and I love the idea that, you know, there are all these green jobs that are being created and that people are doing great things. And that's going to be a good, segue into what Dan is doing with involvement and why I have joined forces with him. We work very hard to grow food locally through Dan's program, Food Security Refreshed. Actually, Jim McHugh, who I see on here, is one of our change makers who's helped us turning our compost piles. I think Jim helped to do about, like 10,000 pounds. So it's pretty intense. One of the great things, do we see? Yep, there's Jim. One of the great things about that is, when you are growing food locally, thinking about it from a food waste perspective, unfortunately, there are times that, you get that recall that spinach, has been contaminated with E. coli or salmonella. And then all over the country, people have to throw out food because nobody knows where it came from. It could be in any grocery store in any part of the country. Well, you never hope that happens, obviously. If you are growing your food locally, well, you know what? You know where it was grown, and we only have to dispose of what was actually produced in that area instead of the whole country. So, what I do, I don't know, Dan's flipping all over the place. So I guess you can go to the next one there, Dan. Yeah, so this is kind of where, involvement has helped me with some of the things I do. I am not a graphics kind of person or marketing, so they help me with this. I did get into this to make what is called worm castings or vermicast, but it's basically just worm poop. And one of my favorite things to tell kids when we do our school presentations is that, every time you're playing in dirt, you're playing in worm poop. But what's amazing about worm poop is that it has a lot of microbial life that helps plants access the nutrition that is in your other growing medium. So when I first got into this, I always thought that castings were high nutrient. They're actually not. They actually have very little nutrients, and you can't call them a fertilizer, potassium. Worm castings are actually very low on that NPK scale. They're like 100. But what the microbes do, as I said, they help the plants access things that would be much harder for them to access otherwise. Such as calcium. Calcium, it's something that it's a lot of work for a plant to get that mineral. And worm castings help do that. Castings themselves will retain moisture and release it as the plant needs it. Worm tea, as you can see, that's amazing because the thousands of microbes that are in castings are like millions in worm tea. So a little bit goes a long way. The worm tea can actually work as a natural pesticide, herbicide, insecticide, protect against a variety of plant diseases. And it's all natural, it's all organic, and it's all made from food that would have otherwise gone into landfills. And how we got into the composting piece of things is that worms are super picky, like really picky, pickier than my sister. They don't like lemons. They don't like onions. And one of the first places I worked with is here in my neighborhood in Allentown, a great restaurant called Onion Maiden. I'm sure many of you have heard. First bucket I opened from them was all lemons and onions. And I'm like, well, now what? And that's where I had known about backyard composting. But when you step up that game, you get into what's called thermophilic composting. Thermophilic means heat loving. And it'll blow people's minds because in the middle of winter, it can be negative degrees outside. Our compost piles have hit 150 degrees, almost 160 in the winter. And we don't add anything to that. What does it is the microbes just showing up and eating away at those food scraps. And I always kind of describe it as like, a microbe party. You get to somebody's house, a couple of you, a couple more, ton more, and you're like, whew, we got to open up windows because it gets so hot. And that's pretty much what the microbes are doing. And what's really cool then is once you do that, you get that pile up to about 140 degrees. You keep it there for at least 3 days. It's going to kill any pathogens. At 130 degrees, it's also going to kill seeds at 140 degrees. At that point, I can then just feed it straight to the worms. What's even cooler, worms don't eat food scraps. They eat the microbes that arise from the decomposition of the food scraps. So when I give them what's called pre-compost, it's just like a big bowl of microbes that's readily available for the worms to eat and digest. And what puts their microbes into the soil is literally it passing through their guts. And it is really one of the best things for plants. So yeah, that's kind of the deal. And I think I'd like to turn it over to Dan and talk about how we do amazing things together.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Can everybody see me currently? I start video. Hello, everyone. My name's Dan Little. I am the Executive Director of Involvement. And what I wanted to talk about today was how we're working together with a bunch of different organizations, including Worm Return, to create a regenerative agricultural system that is completely self-sufficient and completely contained within lower income communities that help build wealth in those communities. So this program is called Food Security Refreshed, and we're entering phase 2 of our Food Security Refreshed this season. Last year, I showed some pictures last year of Jim McHugh working on the compost heaps. This year, we're actually going a little bit further and bringing everything full circle, and I'll explain how we do that momentarily. But the basic idea is working with Worm Return to collect food waste, turn that food waste into compost, and then turn that compost to fresh and healthy soil to grow food to be used by the community, whether it's donated to food pantries or donated to restaurants. So one of the things that we're doing is a little bit different than most initiatives. So most initiatives, when they think about what they want to do, they'll try to identify a funding source. And there are plenty of great reasons for that because, the US dollar is ubiquitous and it's used all over the place. But we're kind of doing things a little bit differently in order to identify a sort of second way in lieu of the context of funding shortages that we're seeing throughout the economy and in effort to bring and keep wealth in local communities. So just give you a brief overview of the different sectors within the economy to kind of get an understanding of why there is a lot of funding deficits, particularly in lower income communities in which we're working in. In this case, it would be Hazelwood. Is that a lot of funding for government and a lot of jobs that would be normally supplied by the private sector have been cut or wages have been suppressed, and people are less able to build livelihoods than they used to be able to. The philanthropic sector has picked up has taken the baton, but the amount of funding that is available within the philanthropic sector can't match the deficits created by government and the private sector. So what we're looking to do is taking a cue from history and implementing community currencies. And we find that community currencies are very, very good for keeping wealth local and actually facilitating a circular economy. And I'll explain how we do this. This is a little bit of a map of community currencies that were in existence during the Great Depression and economic time, not unlike our economic times. And we're also drawing inspiration from something called, that you guys might be familiar with, many people are, because there was talks of reviving it, which is the Civilian Conservation Corps, which basically guaranteed people jobs to work on public works projects. But we're doing that at a local scale, and we're doing it outside of current economic systems. And our Civilian Conservation Corps members we're calling change makers. So we're actually completely reimagining the job as it is here. And we're actually deploying individuals to work on these community projects that earn a local currency that can spend for neighborhood resources. One, it allows communities, in this case, the project that we're working on, to have sovereignty over which services are valued. So determining which services can be valued and are determined to be valuable. And community currencies keep wealth within the communities, because oftentimes when you're paid money, you're going to buy your food from a larger conglomerate or a factory farmer that it might exist out in Missouri and doesn't necessarily keep that wealth within the community. So this just kind of shows you a little bit of economic principles that we're kind of using for this. But the idea behind what we do in involvement is this community-driven decentralized system, so that communities have the sovereignty to be able to fund the initiatives that they choose. So a little bit about how the system works. Basically, we're taking people where they are as they are, deploying them as change makers, teaching them skills on how to hot compost in this instance, or how to effectively route yourself so you can collect food waste, as Laura is handling that side of the system here. And people, for their time, are actually earning what we call community currency. These community currencies are actually minted when they're earned. So it's money, quote unquote money, that doesn't exist, that now exists in the economy, and it can be spent throughout the community and allows people, businesses in particular, to garner an extra channel of revenue where they can spend it on things they need. The more you mint, the more resources are flowing through the community. So this is a diagram. Let's see if I can zoom. Whoops. Guess I can't zoom in here. But this is a diagram of the system that the community currency is enabling us to do with worm return. So what we're doing is exploring a circular economic system where we're collecting food waste. Worm return is responsible for collecting food waste from businesses and from residents within Hazelwood and around surrounding communities. And then we implement our typical grid hot composting or thermophilic composting process. And the change makers are responsible for doing all these things under the supervision of Laura and under the supervision of DECA Resources and in partnership with the Mission Continues. The stage that we're getting into now is actually growing food using that compost. After we grow the food towards the end of the year and the harvest, we then can actually transport this food back to the places where we collected the food waste from. So we're actually, in effect, recycling food. And then that food can be used by different restaurants and different businesses within the community. These circles in here explain how the community currency creates those exchanges. So at every point in which we're handing off a resource, community currency is exchanged. And because the community currency is staying within the community, it allows these cycles to stay within the community and also grow. So these are our current partners that are currently in the network. We got Dillamato's Market, which is a market in Hazelwood that is actually accepting the community currency in exchange for some of the produce that we grow and for some of the compost that we are producing as well. We also have Elizabeth Pharmacy and a number of other businesses throughout the different communities in which we're working in. This is a photo of the hot composting, grid composting process that we've used. And these are some of our change makers, including myself. You can see myself in there. And there's Jim McHugh, who we referenced earlier. And there's a picture of the temps. We get temps up to 150, 160 degrees. You can see This was March of last year, right before the pandemic, these piles steaming. And here is the new site that we're working in Hazelwood. So back then we were working on the Hilltop Urban Farm, and we have moved operations directly into Hazelwood now. And we've adopted a lot, and now we are working to clear this lot. Of course, we're composting everything that we're clearing, and we're doing the grid composting on the site. So this is what the site currently looks like. I just took these photos on Tuesday. As you can see, some of the compost piles are really heating up there. But we're looking to continue this operation and build it out. And if people are interested, quick plug, we are actually having a volunteer event this Saturday on March 27th. I have the link here, where we're working with the Mission Continues to help clear the site and help get more area available for us to start growing food and planting seeds and seedlings. So if you guys are interested in joining this initiative and helping to work with Worm Return to become a change maker, you are welcome to follow us at our social media channels, or you can contact either of us. These Worm Return, since she has a more unique name, all of her channels are at Worm Return. Of course, us, involvement had been taken, so we have involvement _ment. But you feel free to reach out to us if you guys have any questions, or join us in a breakout room.
Thank you very much, Dan and Laura. That was some very creative approaches. I hope for everybody listening, this is generating some good questions in your mind. Just a reminder to put those questions in the chat, and we'll be reading those and redirecting them back to the panelists in the next session, which is the Q&A. At this point, I'd like to welcome our last presentation from Brack Webb of 5th Season. Brack will be talking about vertical indoor farming.
All right, thank you very much. Let me get my screen sharing here as well. All right, so I'm Brack Webb. I'm co-founder and CTO of 5th Season. We are an indoor vertical farming company. I'm going to walk through more of what that means as I go through the presentation. But our farm, which we opened up just at the beginning of this year, towards the end of last year, and really got into a lot of our sales this year, is in Braddock, which is right outside of Pittsburgh. We consider it part of it, so in the 412 area code. And it's been a delightful place for us to have our indoor farm there. Let me just get started here on the presentation. So at 5th Season, we're all about fresh. And what that means is we care about people getting fresh food to them. And really, when you say that, it also means local. So your food is going to be freshest when it hasn't traveled all the way across the country, when it hasn't sat in distribution centers and trucks for a long time. And that's something that indoor vertical farming allows. So really, to do that, we are a tech and food company in one. To reimagine fresh, we had to achieve fresh, we had to reimagine the perishable food system from the ground up. That means we had to take horticulturalists, operational growers, engineers of all types, mechanical, software, robotic, food safety experts, operational people that are great at operational definition, and people who are great at the execution of operations. And we really had to look at each part of the growing process, the seeding process that's typically done in indoor farming, and I'll get more into how we farm. It's a hydroponics, but the seeding process, the hydroponic growing process, indoors in vertical farming, the harvesting process, packing, and the supply chain as well, and what it takes to work with local grocery stores, local restaurants to get them our fresh food. So what local indoor vertical farming allows us to do is basically go farm to shelf. And like I said, that is fresh. So advantages are freshest greens that you're going to find in the store. We're herbicide and pesticide free because we do complete indoor growing, and there's nothing's going to can get into the environment, and therefore we do not have to use those. We get 3x the average shelf life. That's because our plants are incredibly healthy, and also because we're getting them. They're not taking days to get to that shelf, and in the end, that's going to lead you to the best taste and experience. So just to show you some of our products, quick sales pitch here in the beginning, but two of these are going to come out very soon, our baby romaine and the Caesar shake up, our version on a Caesar salad that's coming out soon. But our spinach, our proprietary blends of, we call it a Bridge City blend and our Three Rivers blend. You can find those two blends in pretty much almost every Giant Eagle store here in the city and throughout Western Pennsylvania. And as well as some of our salads. And you can also find these online at fifthseasonfresh.com. You can order our salads and get them delivered directly to you, as well as our fresh greens. And you can also do a subscription. So we have our salads. We started actually when COVID was hitting, we started it to get people fresh, ready to eat food when a lot of other options went down, and it took off from there. And so we really went from just being a vertical farm to do fresh leafy greens to one that also provides salads. And so that's definitely a direction we're going to continue. And that's been really awesome. And you can find those in coffee stores and stuff around the city too. So because we're doing indoor vertical farming, we are true CEA. So when people talk about greenhouses, and I'll get to more on that too, there's still reliance on the external environment, but there's no reliance in our farm from an external environment. We use all LEDs, so there's no sun. We go vertical. We do hydroponic growing, and so really, when you think about it, and if you can see this video that is coming through in the presentation, okay, it's growing and manufacturing combined. So the growing process is very much, while it's vertical, like a hydroponic growing process. But to get it into there, get it out, and get it packaged all in one without it having to travel to a pack house. Again, another reason that it's fresh. Another reason that it's not having to be washed over and over again and handled many different times. Is very much like the pack houses typically are, the GMP good manufacturing process throughout the entire grow process. And as a result of that, our farm is incredibly clean. So even in the agricultural part. So to just dive a little bit into indoor agriculture, as I already mentioned, greenhouses, they do help you maintain the environment, and they can compensate for external factors. They are great at trying to grow a lot of things. And there's things still, tomatoes, berries, that greenhouses are still number one for doing. They supplement the lighting to make up for cloudy days. You can certainly make sure you get the right nutrients. When you irrigate, you're putting the nutrients typically in the water and not relying on the soil. And that goes into our topics here today. But like I talked about, for indoor vertical farming, it's true controlled environmental agriculture. So we maintain the optimal growing conditions for the crop by controlling all aspects of the environment. With that zero reliance, we can completely control the air quality, the temperature, humidity. We can add CO2. Chemical filtration on that air filter on the air. So we are actually right next to the Eckert Thompson steel mill in Braddock. But because we have the same level of filtration, we have multiple levels on our HVAC, but even goes through what's the same as your K95 or KN95 masks that you might have been wearing during the COVID period. That's the same filtration that our air is going around, and we are circulating most of that air all the time. We have very little exchange from the outside unless we choose to do that for some reason. Completely controlling the light application, the spectrum, the intensity, the period, the duration, the nutrient concentration. We're precisely controlling key elements, nitrogen, magnesium, sulfur, iron, and particularly the pH balance. So the crops are always getting exactly what they want. And what that leads is for a very deterministic output. Exactly when things are going to come out, because it's the same growing process from when they went in. You could build a farm in space or on Mars with this. But the key for us is, right now staying on where we are. You don't need the sun, so why not go vertical? And just to touch on a few vertical farming methods, farms that did vertical farming traditionally start away, and most are moving away from this. They fertigate, so irrigate with their fertilizers with an air mist into the roots, and they're just sort of suspended, as this picture shows here. That's not really great for the automation of going and getting it out of these tall racks that you need to be in and bringing them back down. Not to mention the plants, you need to water them all the time. So if you were to have a system failure of any kind and they just don't get water for an hour or two, you're going to be in trouble. Hydroponic is just very popular growing plants, has been for a long time, and you fertigate into a medium that supports the roots. Ebb and flow, which is what we do, also known as float and drain. You fill up a tray that's holding those plants The medium soaks that up and holds it. The plants soak it in through their roots, very natural process. And then it comes back out and we recirculate that water. We don't just flood it and then let it drain to waste. We flood it and we let it drain and we treat that water and recirculate it. There's other forms, even some crazy things like this rotary, but again, the practical way of plants wanting to grow and us just really being able to automate around that with our tray and our vertical farming solution is what enabled us to do what we do. Like I said, we do hydroponic ebb and flow. Our nutrient balance system recirculates. We use the LEDs. And the reason we use LEDs is it's CapEx effective. That's really what enabled vertical farming. It's also OpEx effective thanks to efficient energy usage. We've also built a microgrid at our farm where we can pull off the main grid or use solar power as well as natural gas power. That's a redundancy, and things go wrong. It also means we can do peak shaving, and honestly, with power transmission, we can save on energy usage when we do that. And the recirculating nutrient enriched water is good, is really key for reducing a lot of waste. So we use 97% less land. So we're using the land that our farm is on. We're using this media we put in. We use a peat moss-based media. That media, when it comes out, we do compost it. So that can go into the compost, things like you heard here, and up to 95% less water. Really, the only reason you ever get rid of it is because, as we all know, the plants soak up different nutrients at different levels, and the type of fertilizers you're putting in maybe the plant's opening up more magnesium, but you're putting in magnesium sulfate into your fertilizer. So you just dump it to get that fresh batch. But the plants use up so much of it that often we're just topping off our nutrient system, our fertigation system. And it's recirculating through, and that keeps it fresh. We're able to go weeks before we have to dump it out and exchange it. At our farm, just to give you an idea of scale, at 100% capacity, we would circulate and reuse about an Olympic swimming pool of water every day. And so what kind of careers do we have? I mean, we're a company that does a bit of everything. So because we're a company that wants to sell our produce, and we sell directly to the consumer. We have consumer experience and D2C engagement. We obviously sell to retail stores such as Giant Eagle. And so we have retail sales and account management. We've got to market to people through all of those different ways that they can get our products. So marketing all of the ways, definitely food product development, whether you're talking about doing salads and future value added products that we will do, or just working on figuring out what is the way that we want to get baby romaine grown into folks, and what kind of varieties that we like for that. And horticultural science, we have PhDs in horticulture that are working on coming up with the grow recipes that go through our system. Certainly the mechanical and electrical engineering, automation, embedded systems, all of the software types, firmware, IoT, back-end, front-end, supply chain management. So even though we're close, we still, D2C programs, getting our salads made, getting them to the grocery stores. All of that is items that supply chain still focuses on and are hyper local. We do hope to build these farms in multiple locations, and so then we can have those network of farms working together, getting people local produce, creating local jobs, and growing things that are typically only grown in Southwest California or even outside of the country, but now growing in your town year round. And of course, all the traditional business things, finance, human resources, and more. So with that, I actually want to share a video which can say a lot of this even better than I can. And I'm going to get that started right now in 1 second. All right, hopefully this works well.
When Fifth Season delivers the food to my house, it feels like the milkman's coming. Like, I get excited, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, yo, like, a little Tuscan, I feel like a little Southwest in my life. Ooh, them sweet grains is calling me. So, like, I get to pick what I want, and I love all of them, but that spicy Southwest, listen, that spicy Southwest is serious. When I was eating, I was like, okay, since it's a little spicy, I was a little worried, but it was the perfect amount of spiciness. I'm 412 grown, they're 412 grown. So to know that they keep it in the city and keep it loyal to the base around them, you couldn't ask for anything better.
I'm Nate Shadle, and this is the speckled egg. One of my favorite dishes, egg in a hole. We use the Three Rivers blend with some herbs, some dill and some chives inside. It's a little spicy and it is a nice full bite. That's what Fifth Season is doing, is innovating a way of growing lettuce and a way to bring it all year round. I can use them 2 days later, 3 days later, a week later, and sometimes even 2 weeks later, and they're just as good as the day I have them.
Fifth Season to me is all about fresh. Fresh is about getting your produce the day after it's harvested, so it's not traveling all across the country to get to you. It's made by people you know in your neighborhood that are doing it, and then it's all enabled by our technology, where we can completely control the environment, which means we have the consistent fresh produce for you, and it's the same every time. We're not dictated by the season. So that's why we can do year-round fresh. In our farm, we can control the light spectrum, the light intensity, the airflow over the plants, the temperature and humidity that they're getting from the air, the nutrients that they soak up, the pH, iron content. So when you look at organic farming and all these things that are built to maintain the land and maintain the environment, this is true sustainable farming.
We can recreate any season that you want. Right now, the crops that we're growing, a lot of these salads grow best in the early spring, so we create that early spring growing condition to be the same year round. A lot of these crops that are grown in the field, there's beautiful spring crops, but then summer comes. And even though I love summer, it's not the best time for growing lettuce, for example. We can make salad that tastes like it has dressing on without any at all. We can make leaves that are spicy. We can make leaves that are sweet. We can make lettuce that's juicy and crispy. And we can influence all those things through the environmental controls that we have.
Braddock was a great location for us to build. We're right next to a steel mill and a large gas plant. I mean, it's an industrial area. And when we look at this, in a way, we're manufacturing plants.
Braddock, as a community, a lot of people left, but a lot of people stayed and showed how strong that they were. When I drive to Braddock, I see opportunity more than anything else. Fifth Season has made positive impacts in the community of Braddock because one of the strong pillars is it's brought jobs to the community, which is an economic benefit. And it also has shown us that offering these fresh ingredients to the community, like just being there, is awesome. The future of Braddock, to me, it looks like more art, more businesses, more collaborations.
The Free Store was a way to kind of merge together this idea that some people have so much and some people have so little, and how can we work together and bring these two worlds into one. So when you look at poverty markers, Braddock was a community that needed love and investment and care, just like so many communities out here in the Mon Valley. Fifth Season was this incredible addition to our community. It was a way of doing something that had been done before, but they came doing it in a completely new and creative way. And with our partnership with Fifth Season, they regularly bring us salads and greens. And in this case, this donation is earmarked for us.
You don't see too many companies be personal. And I think one thing that Fifth Season has been really good at is feeling like a friend. And that, to me, is the big difference.
Braddock is an amazing, hardworking community, pulling from all around Pittsburgh to work there, but this just has a history of hard workers doing things like this. And our goal is to get Fifth Season produce in store shelves across the country, but not because they're coming from one farm and shipped across the country, because they're coming from a farm in your neighborhood with people from your neighborhood working at it, getting that produce to you fresh. We just go straight from our farm right to you. And that's it. So I talked a lot in the video too, but probably better than I was going to do here. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Brack. You gave us a lot of food for thought there.
Thank you.
We're running a tiny bit behind, but I think we have about 10 minutes or a little less for questions. And I see a lot of great questions in the chat. So I'm just going to read some of these and direct them to our speakers. And thank you guys for generating some great thoughts and great ideas here. A question for Darlene. The question is, do you see African Americans getting involved in agriculture in Pennsylvania?
I do believe that there's definitely room for everyone in our agriculture in Pennsylvania. I see more, of course, in the urban agriculture areas, working in those areas, but we also see some in some of the more rural areas too. I want to say most of what we're seeing right now are probably ones who've had a history there in that area of some type, but hopefully we will see more and more, coming into our rural areas as well and embracing the farmland and the farmers embracing them too.
Right. I would offer the same question to the other panelists because I know you guys work in urban areas. And what are you seeing?
Certainly. Working in Braddock, we have folks that Braddock has a heavily African-American community, and a lot of folks there coming to work at our farm. I would say at our farm employees, we are probably 80% plus African-American actually at the moment. And so I think that that's really exciting. Because also being in Braddock, it's a food desert. So it's tough for people if they have to drive to get their groceries, sometimes to even get fresh food. And so we're able to do sales in our parking lot as well as giveaways for people to come. And so really educating folks about farming and farming of fresh greens and all of that. And that really has been able to create more interest in jobs.
Great. Dan or Laura, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. Yeah, I think right now there's definitely a lot of interest in the change maker opportunities we do provide. I would say it, as there is a little, our change maker demographic skews towards individuals that are very, very mission driven. Because a lot of people come to us when they're finding the ability to work on things that and the ability to earn something back in exchange for working on something that they're currently passionate about. That doesn't always happen within the communities in which we're working in currently. So there's a lot of effort that we are doing in order to engage communities more directly and partnering with local service organizations. And really kind of exposing a lot of different people to the work that we're doing and getting people interested. Because what we've seen so far has been people who have had kind of already had that seed planted in them in terms of wanting to kind of get involved in these sorts of initiatives. So there's going to be a lot of effort in the upcoming weeks and months to really talk a lot about the work we do and how it can be really fun and how it's paving a new way for the future.
Great. Thank you.
Laura, did you want to say anything?
I think all you guys got it pretty well, but, obviously we're working on a lot of initiatives, in my neighborhood and the surrounding areas of Pittsburgh, all of our amazing neighborhoods. And I'm definitely seeing a lot of people, starting to work on growing their own food. And they talked about all those victory gardens that started throughout the pandemic. And, people are just starting to see the importance of local sustainable food. And it's such a support to our communities because, you're hiring people in the community that are going to spend money in the community and just that whole concept of self-reliance. So yeah, I've seen the growth and people coming back to this kind of stuff.
Great. Thank you. I have a comment here, a question that's probably for any of you, and I'll take a shot at it too once you're finished. The question that came in is, how much of a financial hump must a typical farm get over when transitioning from traditional farming, tilling the soil, to a regenerative model of farming? And is there funding at the federal level or in the upcoming infrastructure bill that can help support that work?
If I may, I would actually like to start on that one because so keep in mind, I can't grow anything, which is how I got into composting. I have truly killed mint, which is quite a skill. But watch the movie Kiss the Ground. One of my diversion partners told me about it. I literally, have your tissues or, reusable handkerchiefs that I was crying by a third of the way in because of how devastating it is what we're doing to our environment and our food system. And by the end, I was crying again because there's such hope. And it's people like us that are part of that hope. And one of the people they talked to, he went completely to regenerative agriculture. And his business was really struggling prior to implementing regenerative ag. And now he's thriving, profits and revenue that he never thought he would have seen using the traditional, chemical applications of growing food. So that's very inspiring. And I don't know if it truly answers the question because I don't have experience, but seeing that somebody said, yeah, this, like, why, again, I saw somebody in there say, why aren't we all doing this? And that was kind of his question. They showed a picture of like his land and then like the neighboring farms, and his is like lush and beautiful and, using the right cover crops. And yeah, it's just like, wow, so yeah, I think it's very possible.
Thank you. Yeah, that was an amazing film, Kiss the Ground, if anyone wants to Google it and stream it. Anyone else?
So
I think that's a good question that they raise about, what's the cost and so on, because if you're looking at a farm in a rural area and so on, for instance, our farm, we don't have the no-till equipment because it would not be cost effective for us. However, we hire a neighbor who has no-till equipment to no-till for us. And my father started this years ago when he wanted to transition from, and not till the land like they used to. So there are ways around it, but, having to have that cost, it would be cost prohibitive if we had to have all of our own equipment, but you don't. You can, like that, hire it to be custom farmed for the no-till process. We also use rotational grazing. That's a matter of making sure you have your fence, good fences for that and have it set up correctly. There are also some tax credits if it is someone who has the acreage and they feel like they want to invest in that equipment themselves. There are tax credits that you can use to offset the cost of that, but that equipment is very costly.
Yeah, very good point. Anyone else has a thought on this? What I was going to share is that from where I sit at PASA, we have many of our members do these practices as well. And as Darlene hinted at, the difficulty is in the transition cost to get from one thing to another. And I think that's what our questioner was wondering. A lot of these practices ultimately pay for themselves and more, because when you're not having to put in as many inputs, whether it be pesticides or fertilizers or other, even the cost of the gas when you're plowing, you do have some savings that offset some of the costs to doing things differently. But you do have a transition period where a little bit of extra income or subsidy would be actually very helpful in moving some of these practices to be wider spread. I don't know if the infrastructure bill that's being talked about at the federal level will address this. It would be nice if it did, because when we think of infrastructure, there's a natural capital and a natural infrastructure that is very important and is often underfunded. I would say that there's a lot of talk about, there's been progress over the years in the federal farm bill paying for a lot of this. As Darlene mentioned, the REAP tax credit program at the state level does offer farmers some funding, pretty good funding, to purchase no-till equipment. And I would say the cooperative model is gaining some traction too, as people share resources. You know, the cost of a no-till drill can be anywhere from $200 to $15,000 or more. And sometimes heavy equipment is really cost prohibitive if you're a small farm. So there are some creative ways, and there's more and more of them coming up. Okay, I have a question for Brack. You have a lot of questions, in fact.
Okay.
Do you have alternatives to plastic in your packaging? The questioner says they notice you use a lot of packaging. Are you considering other materials?
Yeah, when we first got started, our intention was to not do that. We go to food service. It is true also in plastic bags. I mean, the biggest thing I can say is, you know, we're trying to do a lot of things for as a company, which leads to sustainability. And plastics, similar to energy, is a problem we're all sharing across all things. And especially in the United States, we don't really see the cost of plastic. It's in a lot of waste. And when, you know, there's a lot of effort that goes in doing what we do. And so there's cost that comes with that, which can impact our margin. And we have to be on the shelves, and consumers will just regularly grab the plastic. So until we realize that cost, I mean, basically we will lose to someone in a plastic container, because people see that as fresher. They see that as a product and sees what they want to get. And that may be a little bit of a stretch, because we're all in this community and talking about this right here. And we see past all of that, but for a lot of other folks, they don't. And so, you know, if we become a national company, we have farms in it all over the country, and we're able to really dictate how things go on there, we could really push that initiative. Right now, it's fighting to be seen on the shelves, and for people to believe our message in the less than 9, 7, sometimes 5 seconds they take looking at all of the packages that are in that area to choose what they want to do. So certainly, you know, it's not that I am pro-plastic by any means. Just want to stress that that's part of the consumer problem with looking at plastics, and part of the problem our country has. And I think there are things that the government can do to help all companies, especially when startups and smaller companies, whether they're family owned or they're a startup like ours, and they're smaller to the big companies, that if they help, you know, especially like plastic water bottle companies that kind of pushed that water bottles are recyclable, even when a lot of them are not in many areas, if they really help that cost go through, which may sometimes get put to the consumer. But that, like I said, actually feeling that cost, even if in America we can only realize it not because we have the huge landfills that honestly we ship plastic over to other countries, but because you see that cost go through and you say, hey, a recyclable piece of package would work great. Mycelium-based, mushroom-based packaging would work great. I think those things are really cool. It's just very hard to compete and be able to do what we focused on, which is changing the growing process and being able to give people fresh greens, create local jobs, the sustainability of indoor vertical farming, and then also fight that battle at the same time. Not that we don't want to fight and we won't get there, but that's part of the competitive problem right now.
Great, thank you. We're basically up against our timeline to get into the breakout rooms. So just a reminder, you'll have an opportunity to click on the room you would like to be in. Each of our panelists is going to be in one of those 3 rooms, and you'll get a chance to maybe ask some of the questions you didn't get a chance to hear us address in those breakouts. We're then going to come back together. So if you can appoint a note taker in each of your rooms, just to do a really, really brief report back when we come back together. Don't disappear. This is the chance that you have to ask your questions directly to our panelists, get a little, not one-on-one, but a little closer than what we have now, and then come back and hear the results, and then we'll wrap up. Thanks, everybody, and kudos for you guys for staying till 8:30. I think you get some extra credit, and I'm delighted that you were able to hang with us. At this point, we'll get a real quick, because we're at the end of our time, but we'd like to hear from each room. We'll start with room number 1. What were the sort of the key things that you guys discussed very briefly? Any insights that you want to share with us?
So I think what struck me was there was a question. Well, Sarah raised another question that she was going to ask everybody. originally, but which is what was the impact of the pandemic on the farmer fund link, and it actually had a stimulating impact, both in terms of Darlene called it a reinvigoration of local foods. That became more important, and then also Darlene mentioned that, like with PA Farmlink, that it helped people realize that life is precious, but it can be brief, and that got farmers to work on succession planning.
Thank you. And any other thoughts, or should we move on to room 2?
I can jump in for room 2 if we want. So we were in the room with Dan and Laura, and we talked a lot about bioplastics. We kind of, delved down a little bit of a bioplastics hole, discussing the way in which biodegradable, bioplastics, compostable things are not the same. So that was most of our discussion, but something interesting that I do think came up is that Laura mentioned that Worm Return is looking to potentially hire more staff in the future, and composting is kind of a growing field. I'll also flag that I think there were a couple of questions that were in the chat initially for people for Dan and Laura that weren't in our breakout room. So if you do have additional questions for either of them, you can definitely reach out through their websites or through their social media pages, or Dan and Laura can share their information in the chat. And also, shameless plug to follow Reimagine Jobs on Twitter, and you can see their Twitter handles. That's our short report back.
Thank you. That's great. If we actually make a match tonight between a job seeker and a job provider, then I think that's pretty neat. Okay, room 3. What did you guys discuss?
So we were in room 3 with Brack of 5th season, and we had people who made a good connection with him in terms of education and potentially helping some students at Chatham who want to open a cafe post-pandemic, and Molly with the Manchester Bidwell, who wanted to connect about jobs. One of our discussions was replicating the model and expanding and the challenges that go into that. And Brad went into that a little bit because of the technology. And that's also the piece of it that made it so difficult in terms of the plastic packaging, is trying to stay competitive and figure all that out. And so he shared some of that story with us as well. Thanks a lot, Brad.
Well, thank you all. I know we're at the hour. Thank you for joining us so much.
I wanted to say, this is Jim McHugh. I was with Brack's group.
Sure.
And watching it, it was wonderful, using a pollutant in the sense that we have too much of it, CO2, using that to grow food, but also it reminded me of the living machine, which is a constructed wetland which can grow any number of plants and animals too in a pond, or it's taking flowing water that may be polluted, and in the process of cleaning the pollution by biofiltration and biodegradation of the pollutants and filtering, it ends up with it can end up with potable water. But that's great. People need to be making money doing very efficient urban farming.
That's an excellent point. I think there's actually a living wetland machine like that at the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge outside of Philadelphia, if anybody wants to check that out. Just to wrap up, as a reminder, check out reimaginejobs.org for more career opportunities. If you're with an organization, consider becoming an exhibitor on the site by clicking Become an Exhibitor on the homepage of the site. Tonight's program is part of a series of monthly programs diving deeper into the sectors on the website. Follow #Jobs Reimagine on Twitter and the Reimagine Beaver County on Facebook to stay up to date on the upcoming programs. Our next event on April 28th will focus on sustainable construction. We hope to see you there. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to the Reimagine team who does such a great job.